My first week in the mission was very weird. Because I flew from the Provo MTC, we got there a little bit, well, me and another missionary, we got there a little bit later than the rest of our group who had come from the Mexico MTC. And so we got there kind of late at night, and we went out and worked with the assistants in the mission for a couple hours, and then just went back to the mission office and had pizza and then went to bed. The next day was probably one of the weirdest days of my life when I received my trainer. I remember after we had our whole transfer meeting and we had the meeting with the trainers and new missionaries, we went out to our areas and we immediately went to the grocery store because my trainer was also new in the area. And I remember we spent about an hour and a half in the grocery store just looking for peanut butter because I didn't know how to say peanut butter in Spanish. So for anybody that wants to know how to say it, it's crema de cacahuate. So you don't make that same mistake. And it was super embarrassing. But that first week was very interesting because I was having to transition from being in the US to being in a new country, also to being with somebody that didn't speak a lick of English, and I didn't know much Spanish, and trying to adjust to missionary life. And it was a rough transition. It wasn't the easiest, but it definitely gets easier with time as you get used to being outside all day, talking to people all day, and having just a lot of fun in the mission field. And so I think that it does take a while to get used to it. It isn't the easiest transition, but it definitely gets easier with time. So our mission, we are kind of in the northeast part of Mexico, about 2 or 3 hours south of Houston, and we're pretty close to the border. And so our mission covered, I think it was 6 cities. We had part of Monterrey, a very small chunk. We didn't have any of the main city, just a little kind of the outskirts. We also had Guadalupe, which is the majority of the mission, and then Apodaca, which is another big city, and Juarez. We also had Cadereyta and China. China was the farthest area away from the mission home. It was about 2 hours away, and it's just a little small town. And Cadereyta came in second. That was about an hour away from the mission home. So the mission was really pretty small. All of my areas were within about 20 minutes of each other. I served in Guadalupe, in Monterrey, and in Juarez. And they were all very different areas. Monterrey and Guadalupe are a lot more affluent. Monterrey is a very Americanized place. There are a lot of American companies like Walmart, Costco, Sam's Club, Carl's Jr., Little Caesars, like all these little American, well, not little, but these American franchises. And it's very Americanized as well with the culture, a lot of American music, but it's still Mexico. And so it's still pretty run down in places. In Monterrey, I was a secretary in the mission for 10.5 months of my mission. And so I was in the mission offices, which was the most affluent area. That was in Guadalupe, and part of our area had Monterrey. And in that area, it was very affluent, a lot of big businesses. And then I was also serving in Guadalupe, in a different part of Guadalupe, which was a lot more humble circumstances, and also in Juarez, which was probably the most humble area that I was in. The city kind of has a bad reputation for being pretty dangerous. I never really saw that. You hear a lot of stories about missionaries that get mugged or different things in missions around the world, but I was never robbed or mugged, or I don't know. So it's a pretty safe place. It's kind of starting out just kind of what it looks like in Monterrey. There are a lot of mountains in Monterrey. It's beautiful. There's a mountain, it's called El Cerro de la Silla, and it's just this huge mountain. It's kind of iconic of Monterrey if you look up Google Images. And just a lot of mountains. It's very green in some parts. It's also very dry in some parts, but they get a lot of rain, and it gets really hot and really cold there as well. Religiously, just like every other part in Mexico, there are a ton of Catholics. 95% of the doors you'll knock are Catholic. Also a big Christian, non-denominational Christian foundation there. So they have a ton of churches there, Christian churches, and also a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses. They were always out. And so we'd always try to avoid the streets that they were knocking doors on, because that you don't want to cause problems there. But yeah, I think kind of those main three groups. We didn't really see much atheism. It was still there, it just wasn't as prevalent. Definitely more Catholic, Christian, Jehovah's Witnesses based. In Monterrey, there also was a temple. It was about 20 minutes outside of our mission, but we would go every 3 months to do temples sessions there. So that was awesome. That was a great opportunity to kind of just de-stress a little bit, to go to the temple. But yeah, the church is very, very strong in Monterrey. In one of my wards, when I was serving in a ward called Andalusia, which is in Juarez, we had the ex-temple president, we had the ex-MTC president of Mexico, we had, I mean, just a ton of stake leaders. It was incredible. A lot of my wards that I served in had about 1,000 people on the church, on the records, and about, I mean, the majority of the wards had about 80 to 250 people going each week. We only had one branch in the ward, which is China, and the rest of the areas are wards. So that's really nice. That kind of shows how big the church is there. But yeah, it's definitely growing. So daily, I mean, everybody leaves the house at 10 o'clock. And we would work from about 10 to 2. And every day you eat food with the members at 2 o'clock, or eat lunch with the members at 2 o'clock. And then from 3 to 9 o'clock you keep going. We aren't allowed a dinner break, and so we would go from 3 to 9, and then you eat dinner when you get home. We would try to work a lot through the members. Sometimes it was a little bit tough, so a lot of our work came through contacts that we had made, or proselyting efforts. But we had a lot of success finding new investigators, a lot of success teaching. I mean, we would teach 20 to 40 lessons a week, depending on how the area was. But we had a lot of success. And I mean, it was always better to try to work through the members as well, because you never know what you're going to get through contacts, but usually if it comes from a member, it's a pretty solid reference. And so we worked a lot through references as well. So I guess because all my areas were so close together, there weren't huge differences. I guess with the ward that I was in the offices, it was just known for being the richest, the wealthiest. And so that area was a little bit more difficult to track and to find people in, of course, because of the how affluent it was. In Guadalupe, it was a lot easier to find people to teach and to teach. I guess Guadalupe is more known for just being kind of the biggest area in the mission. The majority of the areas in the mission are in Guadalupe and Apodaca and Juarez. So kind of those main three. With Apodaca and Juarez kind of being the more humble areas, Guadalupe is kind of in between, and some parts of Guadalupe and Monterrey kind of being a little bit more wealthy. Also, some parts of Monterrey that had the outskirts of the city were the most dangerous, more poor areas. But you kind of just get a big mix of different things. The weather, I mean, it is super humid there. And so that causes it to be very hot and humid and also very cold and miserable. The housing circumstances were pretty standard. We would live 2 missionaries to a house. That's a rule throughout Mexico, I believe. And so we never lived with more than one companionship of missionaries. And that made it easier, I think, just easier to work. All of my houses had air conditioning, which was a huge thing. When I got to the mission, that wasn't the case, but the area presidency in Mexico kind of made that rule halfway through my mission. So all the houses now have air conditioning in at least one room, which is typically where you sleep, because you don't want to be sleeping when it's 110 degrees inside your house. All of the houses are made of concrete, and so they kind of insulate the heat and they insulate the cold. And so, I mean, there were a lot of times where in the winter I'd be seeing my breath inside the house, and a lot of times in the summer when you're just sweating bullets because it's so hot in there. But it's incredible. I mean, it was really cool to see that different aspect of living, because we're so privileged in the U.S. And so to see how other people throughout the world live, it's really humbling. My favorite part was definitely the culture. Mexican culture is so fun, with the food, with just the atmosphere. I mean, you'd be studying at 9 o'clock in the morning and your neighbors already have their stereos turned up and you're trying to study, but it's hard to focus because they have their banda or mariachi going. And so I loved that. I thought that was really fun. And the food also is just to die for. A lot of missionaries talk about going places where they have to eat awful things, and I mean, I can't think of a ton of gross things I ate. I didn't particularly like menudo or chicharrón, but you have a lot of different things you eat. Well, one thing I thought what's very unique to Monterrey is they do things that are called carne asadas. Every Friday and Saturday night, you'll see everybody kind of out in the street, especially when there's a soccer game going on or on holidays or a birthday. It's kind of always a carne asada. And so it's a birthday party, we're going to do a carne asada. Soccer game's on, carne asada. It's pretty standard. As far as other traditions go, one thing that's also unique to Mexico, or to maybe Latin American culture, is they celebrate Christmas the 24th instead of the 25th. And so they pretty much stay up all night the 24th and they do presents and it's a huge dinner. And on the 25th, everybody's pretty much just sleeping. So that's pretty unique. Yeah. Food-wise, I love the carne asada. Monterrey has great meat. They would eat something called trompo a lot, which in other parts of Mexico is called al pastor. And they would they'd make kind of like this big taco with a huge flour tortilla. And they would put carne asada. They'd put like melted cheese, carne asada, and trompo in there. And it's called a campechana. It's kind of the famous missionary food down there. And it's super good. They also ate a lot of tamales, a lot of tacos, a lot of something called picadillo, which is something you eat a lot at the lunch appointments with members, which is just ground beef and potatoes, and then beans and rice. I mean, with every meal you eat, there will always be tortillas on the table, salsa, sometimes crema, which is like a kind of sour cream type thing, but it's not sour, it's just cream. It's super good. And a lot of chiles, a lot of peppers, a lot of habanero, a lot of, they called it chile piquin, which is a little super tiny pepper that has a little stem, and your trainer will try to confuse you and make you think it's candy, but don't take the bait. And that's super good. Just a lot of spicy food. They kind of say that if something's not spicy, it doesn't have flavor. And so you eat a ton of spicy food and you learn to really love it. The craziest things I ate cow tongue, I ate a lot of cow head, a lot of insides of pig and cow, which I didn't like. Some missionaries like it. They have this thing called menudo, which is this, they take the tripas, the tripes, from, I think, the inside of a cow. It's either a cow or a pig. And they just throw it in a soup. And it's pretty standard in Mexico. I didn't really like it. Another food that a lot of missionaries sometimes struggle with is called pozole, which is more famous down in Mexico City, but they still eat it in Monterrey. And I really liked it. That's more like a corn soup. But as far as food goes, it's pretty good. I wouldn't worry about that. Well, so I took 2 years of Spanish in high school. Going into the MTC, I felt pretty comfortable, thought I could learn pretty quick. By the end of the MTC, I thought I was fluent, just like everybody does. And then I walked off the plane in Monterrey and realized that I definitely wasn't. I think at the end of my training, so after 4.5 months in the mission, I could pretty much get around. After 6 months, I was pretty much fluent. After about 3 months of being there in Mexico, I could pretty much understand everything people were saying, although there are always things that you're not going to understand even at the end of your mission. But you'll understand 90% of what they're saying after your training. You'll be fluent after pretty much 6 months. A lot of missionaries get stressed, but I think as long as you're just taking advantage of your study time and language study and doing all you can to write down words that you don't know, maybe carry a little notebook with you. That's what I did to learn the language. I'd carry a little notebook with me and just write down words that I didn't know, and then I'd look them up when I got home. I had missionary friends that brought a dictionary with them everywhere, and I don't know, I maybe wouldn't do that, but if that works for you, you can do it. But yeah, language comes. Just don't stress yourself out. So people in Monterrey, there's a huge distinction of how people talk in all different places in Mexico and different words they use, even apart from the rest of Latin America. People in Monterrey tend to speak very angrily, very recio, it's called, very rough. And so they would kind of just get mad and kind of just say weird words to describe how they feel. They would always say, one word they say all the time is nombre, which is kind of its name. They say nombre, and they'd talk very, ¿por qué hizo eso? ¿Por qué está pasando eso? And it's kind of like they sound like they're mad at you, but it's kind of just their tone of voice. They also had a big influence of people from ranchitos or ranchos, which is like the ranches or little towns far away from the city. So those people also would talk very differently, a little bit more rough, use different words. As far as different phrases that are unique, I honestly have no idea because it's the only Spanish I know. But yeah, they say nombre all the time. So if you're a missionary that you don't know anything as you're going out, know the word nombre, know chido, which is awesome. Know, what else? Machín, you'll hear that as well, which is like mucho, like a lot, but it's a lot. You won't hear that as much, but it's good to know. But yeah. One story that was pretty funny that I thought was really good in my mission, it happened in my training. We were teaching this group of drunk guys, which never is good. But a couple of them seemed very interested in kind of turning their lives around, so we were giving it a shot, and we were bringing members with them. And one time we were trying to help one of them, his name was Juan Carlos, we were trying to help Juan Carlos kind of stay off of alcohol. And these were a group of guys that their lives were basically in shambles, and they were like 5 guys living together. Turned out we showed up and it was Juan Carlos's birthday. And Juan Carlos, unfortunately that night had started drinking again because it was his birthday. So they were all pretty much drunk out of their minds. And like any other drunk guy that you see that you'll see in Monterrey, they'll immediately see a güero, a white guy, and they're going to want to talk with you in English. And so they wanted to sing to Juan Carlos happy birthday in English, and one of the guys just started singing, and he just started going, happy baby to you. And I mean, they had no clue what they're saying, but we kind of just rolled with it. And so we sang happy baby for Juan Carlos's birthday, which was awesome. It was super fun. There are so many crazy, funny experiences that happen. On a more spiritual note, I guess one of my coolest mission stories is going into my last transfer. I only had 3 areas, which is very uncommon. I had 6 months in one area, 10.5 months in the next, 6 months in one, and then I had 1 transfer left. So I was pretty sure I was just going to stay there and end my mission. But it ends up I got transferred with a newer missionary, who just had a lot of enthusiasm for the work, and he was ready to work hard. And I was just kind of there to be his companion. And I got to the area, and we had nothing in the area book, nothing going for us. And I think that Monday, or the Monday after my first week in the area, I got an email from my bishop back home. And he had told me kind of to give everything that I had, with the faith that something could still happen with 5 weeks left. And he told me that he knew there was a family kind of waiting for us. In this area, they had a very low baptizing rate. They were not known to baptize a lot. And I knew it was going to be a kind of a tough thing to do. But we both had a lot of faith. And in Mexico, in Monterrey, the current rule for the number of times the investigators have to go to church to be baptized is 3 times. So we knew that we at least needed 3 weeks to baptize somebody. And I had 5 weeks before I was going home. So we only had a 2-week window, pretty much, to find a golden family. So that week, we set the goal to talk to everybody and to focus on faith. That week, we were walking in the street and we saw a guy washing his car. He was a truck driver. He didn't really show a ton of interest at that point because he told us that he wasn't going to be home a lot because he was a truck driver, but we could come back the next week if we wanted. So we set an appointment for that coming Monday. Turns out that we go. And it was weird because I saw the appointment in my mind. I knew who it was, and I was kind of wanting to call it off and just search for more people because I didn't have a ton of faith that it would work out with his family. Turns out we get there and we're knocking. It took a while for them to come out, but his wife answers and lets us in. And we taught her a little bit briefly on her porch. Slowly we kept teaching her. She comes to church that Sunday with her kids, with her 3 kids. They were the most prepared investigators that I had through my whole mission. And my last Sunday in the mission, so your last week in the mission, you go to the mission home on Monday, and your flight leaves, I believe, Tuesday. And so my last Sunday, the day before I reported the mission offices, we baptized his wife and their 2 kids. I got an email about a month ago that he had been baptized, and now their youngest daughter, who turns 8, I believe this coming month, she'll be baptized this next month. That was the only family, the only complete family that I baptized in my mission. And it was in the 11th hour. Miracles happen in Monterrey. We aren't known to baptize 100 people per missionary in their mission, but miracles definitely happen. So, yeah. The hardest point for me and the hardest part of my mission was the first 6 months. Just adjusting, being away from home, getting the language down, being with somebody from a different country 24 hours a day who has a different culture background, different things. That was really hard for me. And that shouldn't be underestimated. I think the biggest lessons that I learned came from my companions, definitely. And I learned that how to be more humble, a lot more patient. When you're knocking doors 5 hours a day, just in the middle of the street when it's over 100 degrees outside with 60% humidity, you learn patience pretty quickly, especially when the dogs are at your heels and all that fun stuff. One thing I think that is super important is just not underestimating the Lord's, His role in the work, I guess, and just making sure that you always trust in Him, because you can work as hard as possible, but if you don't have the guidance of the Spirit, you're never going to get anything done in the mission field. I think that's a tough mission lesson that you learn pretty quick. That it's not your work, it's the Lord's. And I think also just a huge, incredible lesson that I learned is how to see people through the Lord's eyes and see people like our brothers and sisters, and not just as people that are in the street that look like they're really mad and don't want to talk to you. And just to give the work a whole new perspective. I would tell you to prepare to eat some great food, prepare to meet some incredible people, prepare for the hardest experience that you will ever face. Being back home is now pretty tough, kind of living in the real world. I'm sure it's going to get even tougher with a family, but up to this point in my life, nothing has been even close to as hard as the mission was. I'd say get ready for not every moment of every day to be super exciting. That's also a big lesson you have to learn in the mission. But just get also ready to have a ton of fun, and try to get ready to make every moment fun and enjoy every moment. That one phrase, enjoy every moment, got me through the first 6 months of my mission. And I would say that to every missionary that's just starting their mission. Although it may seem hard when you have 23 and a half months left in your mission or 20 months left in your mission, enjoy every moment, because you're going to want to savor every second of it. One thing that I think helped me a lot for my mission was going to the temple a lot. I went to the temple about 2 months before I left, which really gave me some time to prepare myself spiritually through going to the temple. And I thought that helped me leaps and bounds, because you don't get to go as much in the mission, and you need that solid testimony. I think also reading the Book of Mormon before you leave helps a ton. And maybe just trying to learn a little bit of Spanish before you enter the MTC. I mean, nothing will truly prepare you, but just do your best to learn a little bit, because that will give you the edge in the MTC. And just make sure that you're focused. Make sure that you really know you want to go out, and that you're 100% in. Because in the mission field, you have to go all in. So.